Welcome to the Psych Ward Podcast, where we have conversations with everyday people about men. We believe that every man has an authentic version of himself, so we're on a mission. And that mission is to find an answer to one question. What does it mean to be a man?
Welcome back to the Psych Ward Podcast, where we have real conversations about men with men. I'm your co-host, Michael Lucas, and I'm here with the creator and host of this podcast, Eric Ward. Hey, Eric, how are you?
I'm doing all right, sir. How are you today?
Oh, not too bad. Thanks for asking.
It's a little different and a little weird having you do the opening for the podcast instead of me.
Yeah, I was a little nervous.
I'm sure people will hate it.
Probably.
No.
So we're going to do something different today. I'm going to interview you.
Oh, all right.
Did you know that?
I suspected.
So first, let's let the listeners know you have written several books.
Yes, sir.
Today, we're going to focus on one of them called What to Expect When Adopting a Guy, 156 Explanations for Why Men Act Like Men.
It's very specific, 156.
I know. How'd you come up with that number?
I counted when I was done.
And we kind of want to look at the chapter called Why Men Let Their Jobs Define Them. When I first saw this book, I was thinking, I've never actually thought about this topic, so this will be a good one. Can you kind of just give the listeners an idea? What made you write that book?
Mostly just 25 years of being married. I think listening to my wife, ask me repeatedly, why do you do that? Or why are you like that? I think that in combination with working with a lot of couples and men in counseling, men in particular, it's a common theme, I think, in couples counseling is that both men and women are constantly trying to figure out, why is the other person like that? Why do they do that? Why don't they think like me? Why don't they act like me? Why are they so illogical? Why are they so emotional? However they decide to state the question, it really kind of comes down to the same thing. And I don't really have much of a perspective on why women are the way that they are. I'm married to one, and I have 3 daughters that are 2 of them are women, and one is well on her way.
You're surrounded.
I'm surrounded, and I still don't understand them. I still don't know why they are the way they are. But men, I think I've at least started to kind of get a grasp on. So that was kind of the impetus for the book.
Like I said before, I think you're ahead of me on this, why men do things. I just sort of been just doing things and not thinking about it. So I'm learning a lot from you.
So most of us do, I think.
I wanted to kind of read the first paragraph of the chapter because it's got a lot of interesting ideas, I guess, that we can talk about. So it goes something like this. So what do you do? It's a question heard millions of times every day in Western culture. It's often the first thing we men ask when we meet another guy. What you might not know is that as soon as that guy tells us his profession, we immediately place him in a mental box with a label on it. Doctor? Cool guy to know, but I don't need you in your Porsche hanging around making me look bad. Lawyer, scumbag, ambulance chaser. But you know what? Give me your card just in case a night out with the boys goes awry. Factory worker? Good guy. Probably drinks a lot of beer and not the wimpy light stuff. And psychologist. Stop analyzing me, man. So tell us about this chapter and what kind of led to you writing this chapter.
See, the whole book is actually written with women as the intended audience. That being said, it's very much a book that it is just as good a read and probably just as eye-opening for us men as it is for women. Mm-hmm. I think that what attracted me to this particular topic, I've always wondered, why do we do that? We meet a guy at a party. We meet a guy, through a group of friends or somebody else. And invariably, it doesn't take long. Sometimes it's immediate. Sometimes it's within a few minutes. But when there's that uncomfortable silence, we'll kind of look at the guy and scope him out and say, so what do you do? Right. And I really think it's one of the ways that we define people. Fortunately or unfortunately, it is what it is. But I guess I really wanted to know, why is it that we do that? one of the fun things about this book was it's not just 156 chapters of my opinions about things, although my opinions are quite valuable and I think
that'd be a good book.
Worth the cost. No, I don't. I'd probably be thrown out of my house and out of Western culture. But for every topic that's in here, I did a bunch of research, and some of it was brain science research. There are reasons that men and women are different, and a lot of it has to do with how our brain works. Some of it is social and cultural research. And so this topic in particular, it was really interesting reading what other people, in particular the experts, had to say about why men do this. Part of it starts with us just being very, very uncomfortable in most social situations and looking for a topic of conversation. And the reality is most adult men work, and having something to talk about, even if it's our jobs, gives us kind of a head start on conversation.
Yeah, I can remember when I was young and worked at a music store, and when I would meet people, I was kind of like a little bit embarrassed that that's all I did. I taught guitar. I played in a band. I worked at a music store. But surprisingly, I don't know if it was legitimate, but people would be kind of interested in what I did, even though I felt like, why, this is kind of a cop-out job. I mean, teaching guitar, though, is actually, I learned a lot from doing that about counseling. The kids brought in a lot of personal issues and wanted to talk about that as well as learn guitar. So I learned a lot. It helped me in my counseling career. But at the time, I just remember not wanting to tell people what I did, kind of embarrassed. I was in my mid-20s, hadn't gone to college yet. So I think there is a lot of pressure to at least do something that other people might find fascinating.
Yeah, when I tell people that I'm a counselor, they are often surprised, is maybe the right word. Some of it has to do with my personality. I'm very blunt, very direct, maybe just a little bit sarcastic sometimes, just a titch.
A touch.
A titch. But it also, I think, has to do with just my appearance. I'm 6'4". I'm over 250 pounds. I've got the short, almost military type haircut. When I used to do crisis work in emergency rooms, we would get called in and have to go in and introduce ourselves to patients that were locked in the psych rooms. And I would walk in and introduce myself. And I would say probably at least 1 or 2 times out of 10, the first question people would ask me is, are you a cop? Or am I in trouble? No. And the follow-up question was, are you security? No, I'm a counselor. And their eyebrow would go up and they would look a little bit confused for a minute. And then, we would start talking and it would be fine. But I that's the funny thing about my profession is I don't look like what you would think a male therapist would look like. And I don't know what they're supposed to look like, but it's not me. It's probably the right answer.
I remember when I first started working at the mental health clinic that both of us worked at years and years ago. I was in the developmental disabilities programs, and you were in the mental health programs. And I think you were doing crisis work at that time. And I would see you coming and going kind of in a hurry, like there was an emergency. A lot of times you were headed out to a crisis, I'm assuming. And I always just was like, wonder what he does. He's always kind of like in the middle of something and headed out or headed in or getting called, over the PA system to come assist with a client who was unruly. And it seemed like you were kind of like security or something. But then I found out later that you were actually a crisis counselor. And I think you did I forget what the term was. You worked with the hospitals, the clients that got out of the hospitals. But yeah, I remember when I first was aware of you, I thought that too. I thought he must be like some kind of security.
Well, it's funny how we make assumptions about people, right? Based on their appearance or their demeanor and what they do for a living. So
you were tall, in a hurry.
A little scary looking.
A little like serious looking.
Yeah, that's the right word. Yeah.
Eventually, I moved over to the mental health side of things and got to know you. And I remember learning crisis intervention from you, and you were not scary or any of that stuff. You were a great counselor and a great crisis worker. So, yeah, like you said, appearances don't always tell the full story.
It's funny because when we ask people, hey, what is it that you do for a living? And like I said, we put them in a box, right? Like the doctor example. Oh, you're a doctor. Well, I'm sure you're a good guy to know, but you sort of live outside my comfort zone and different lifestyle than I live. And that's cool. I'll call you if I need a prescription, but otherwise take care. And we tend to look for people that check the same boxes as we do, not even necessarily the same type of profession. I talk about this a little bit in the chapter in the book, but I have a very small circle of really close friends, and they all have different jobs. One of them is a firefighter. One of them owns his own business. He's actually getting ready to sell it. He's going to retire or semi-retire and sell the business. One of them is already retired. He worked for the government. They're all very, very different. But what's funny is that they all have, in one way or another, service type jobs. And those are the guys that I've always been most comfortable. It's funny because I'm fairly well educated, but in my personal life, I've never really chosen to spend most of my time around people who are educated like I am. I tend to go more for people that do either trades work or companies that they built or firefighter, things like that. So we talked about why men do this with other men, but I don't think they do it so much with women. We don't come up and say, hey, what do you do? Well, but that's because we don't put women in the same boxes as we do men. When we're at a party or a gathering and we meet a woman, the first thing that runs through our head is not what does she do for a living. We tend to categorize women differently, maybe than we do men. I'm about to get socially canceled by saying this, but I don't really care. When we categorize men, it's right. We categorize men. It's well, which career box do they go in? And we assume based on their career choice that that's the kind of person they are. It's not true with women, and a lot of that has to do with socialization and cultural training. We don't define women by their career like we do men. We do still, I think, as men, we tend to put them in boxes, but it's just a little bit different kind of box. We actually put them in much more important groups and classifications than what they do for a living. Things like, oh, she's hot, but probably crazy. Or she's girlfriend material, or she seems down to earth and nice and would probably make a great babysitter for the kids I have with my future hot wife. That's it, and it sounds really sexist, and it is. But in reality, when we first meet women, that tends to be the approach that we take. Is she attractive? Is she someone that I could date? Is she someone that I want my son to date if we're of that age? Those kinds of questions. And I joked around in the book. It's not realistic for the most part, but you can go even simpler than that and say, well, is this new woman that I'm meeting, is she cool? Like, is she the kind of person I'd go to a hockey game with my buddies and we'd buy each other beers? Or is she uppity and snobby and I'm going to intentionally mislabel her as a lesbian, and then we'll have an argument about what kind of Subaru she drives?
Hey, I drive a Subaru. Of course I do.
Of course you do, because, you probably drive it to the store to buy candles. Oh,
I do. You were talking about the cool chicks. It's almost like we put them in a guy box. It's like, oh, that's the cool chick. We can go have a beer, and she cusses and talks about farts and all these guy things. And guys, they like to hang out with that kind of cool chick.
Yeah, because she checks a lot of the same boxes that our friends do.
Yeah.
It's the similar interest, the same sort of level on the socioeconomic scale. Does she make about the same kind of money we do? Does she have a similar type of job? Those kinds of things. And we feel comfortable around those people. They tend to share our values. They tend to share our beliefs in life, and that's who we want to be around.
So when I was reading this book, your book, when I got to the part about the boxes that men put women in, I felt very uncomfortable.
Why?
Almost like you were giving away a secret. Like, you're not supposed to say that out loud. Don't tell people what we think as what men think.
This book is full of, I guess, our secrets as men, and it was interesting because when I was doing the research for it, I think there were some things that really surprised me. And sometimes they surprise me because I never really even thought about it. Sometimes they surprise me because, I'm not the only guy that thinks that way. And then there were some things that I think really kind of hit home, or maybe resonated with me. And those were the things that really hit home were the ones that felt like secrets. The things that I think we as guys know and think about. And I'll give you a perfect example. There's a whole chapter in the book about how lonely men can be.
Yeah.
And it's men who are married with children and surrounded by friends at cookouts every weekend. They have a job. They're surrounded by their work friends and everyone else. They can be around people all day long. And they're still lonely. And it has to do, and you and I have touched on this before in previous episodes, but has to do with not making emotional connections with people and not being able to truly allow themselves to be vulnerable and actually connect to someone. And I think that's how you end up with men who are really lonely. One of the other things that I think I've always known about myself, and it really, really hit home with me when I started reading about it in literature and other articles, was this concept of us as men looking to our partners, to the females in our lives, to be our moral compass. Uh-huh. And you think about what a compass does, it shows the way, right? It tells us what direction to go. And I know that in my life, there have been so many times that I'm just not sure what to do. And sometimes it's something simple. What's the right way to say this? And sometimes it's a bigger decision. What should I do? What's the right thing? What's the right choice? That I go to Kelly, to my wife, and ask her what is the right decision here. And I genuinely want to know. I want her to give me an answer. I want her to tell me what to do. And it turns out that a lot of men do that. We tend to look to our partners for advice about what the moral choice is in certain situations.
Do you think it's because we think that they have better morals than us? Or why do we do that?
So there's some discussion about that in the chapter. And there's this belief, I think, that women are just morally superior to men.
Yeah.
They're much more likely. And it turns out that that's not as true as most people think it is. I think that men are much less sure of their moral decision making than women are. And a lot of that has to do with, morals tend to have emotions attached to them. Making moral decisions often involves feelings or potential feelings, and we don't like those. We're comfortable with those. And so instead, we almost pass the buck and ask her to do it for us.
That makes sense.
The other piece with moral decision making is that while women aren't, in reality, aren't more moral than men are, they do go about making morality decisions differently. They tend to be much more polite and much more socially conscious. There was a quote that I came across, and I included it in the book, and I pulled it up. I'll read it for you. It says, "Women create, shape, and maintain human culture. Manners exist because women exist. Worthy men adjust their behavior when a woman enters the room. They become better creatures. civilization arises and endures because women have expectations of themselves and of those around them. And you think about, I don't know about you, but the men that I know, while many of them will joke about and criticize and critique the women in their lives, I think they're also always trying to live up to the expectations of their partners, or at least what they think the expectations are. And I think it's part of the reason that we look to women for morality, because we tell ourselves that they're better than we are.
Yeah.
And if they tell us to act a certain way, we think we should.
Yeah, I put a lot of stock into what my partner thinks and believes, and I have a lot of respect for the way she thinks about things. And when I ask questions, I really value her response.
What is it that you value? Is it just you think she's more likely to be right than you are, or do you want to hear a different perspective?
I think I'm usually looking for validation. And then if it is a different perspective, I appreciate that, because a lot of times I get kind of a one-track mind, but then she'll come up with something completely different from what I envision. I'll be like, wow, I didn't even think of that. Well, what I learned in master's classes for organizational leadership is leaders are often very poor at moral and ethical decision-making.
Hey.
So having been...
I lead an organization.
I know. And having been in middle management...
Michael, that's the part where you're supposed to say, oh, Eric, you're different. You do a good job with...
Oh, wait. I was going to put that at the end.
Okay, sorry. Go ahead. Continue.
Yeah. When you know that the majority of leaders are men, that equates to men are not very good at ethical and moral decision-making. It'd be interesting to see, and maybe there is research on that, when it comes to moral and ethical decisions, who is superior at that. My hunch is it may not have to do with sex or gender.
Is it being leaders? Is it the qualities and characteristics that make a good leader what makes them less likely to be moral and ethical in their decision-making?
What I learned was that you can learn to be a moral and ethical leader if you're open to it. If you're not open to it, then obviously you're not gonna. Mm-hmm. So I think it's partly being educated on how to make good decisions. That was a big part of my master's studies in organizational leadership. And I realized that in my career, even as a manager, I was not always the best decision maker. But I also noticed that some of my superiors, some were very good, like you.
There we go.
And some were piss poor at it.
Yeah.
And I didn't realize how much of a leader's job is just decision making. All day, every day, you're making oftentimes decisions that are two bad decisions, and you have to make the best choice.
Yeah. My wife and I are in our 50s, and we're at that point in life where we're starting to look way down the road at retirement. And I've told her I love my job. I love what I do. There is never a day that I get up in the morning and I think, I don't really want to go to work today. Even when I have one of those days that's going to be filled with meetings or writing reports or whatever the case may be, I love what I do. I love the role that I get to play in the organization that I serve. That being said, I can see, or maybe I can begin to see the end of the road. And the appeal to me of retirement is not quitting work. It's not, I don't have to go into work today. I don't have to do my job. I don't have to put in any effort.
Right.
The only appeal to me is handing over that decision-making responsibility. At some point, I am just going to wipe my hands together and hand it off to somebody else and say, it's on you now. You got 100 employees. You got 8,000 clients. You got a multi-million-dollar budget. If you screw it up, people are going to be out of a job and clients are not going to get served and some people will die and it's going to look bad. Like, no pressure. Here you go. Have fun. I'm out. That, I think, is the only appeal. And yeah, and that decision-making process that you're talking about in leadership, it speaks to one of the other things that hit home in this book. When I was doing some research, I I came across this concept, and I kind of had it formulated in my head already, but it was this question of, why are women so much nicer than men? Because they are.
Yeah.
I mean, let's be realistic. In general, women tend to be nice, and men don't. And the more I thought about it, and then I started doing the research, and it confirmed exactly what I thought. And the chapter, the title of the chapter is that, women tend to be nice, whereas men tend to be kind. And there's a difference. And you put it in a leadership perspective, it's a perfect example. We hire people all the time, and people leave. There's a position open. Somebody, we don't fire people very often, but sometimes we do. And, or somebody, the last thing was somebody moved to Australia. So, kind of had to fill that position. But
oh man.
So, right. So when you hire somebody, it's a 50-50 shot, right?
Yeah.
I mean, are they going to work out? Are they going to be any good? Because people can lie. People can lie on paper. They lie in interviews. Their references lie. You never know what you're getting. So it's always kind of a crapshoot when you hire somebody. And sometimes you hire an employee and it becomes very obvious very fast that they're just not the right fit. Maybe they're a bad employee. Maybe they're a bad person. Maybe it's just not the right organization for them, or they're not the right employee for the organization. They're a great employee, great person, just doesn't work.
Yeah.
In that situation, my experience at least has been that women supervisors will be nice. They will stay with the organization. Let's wrap all the support around them so that they blah, blah, blah. Whereas my approach is, if they're not a good fit, they're already unhappy. We're already unhappy. It's just going to get worse.
Yeah.
The kind thing to do is to call them into my office and let them go. And I also, I learned, you talk about the difference between being nice and being kind.
Yeah.
Well, that's actually, you remember this situation probably. We had to fire an employee of yours.
Yeah.
Because he had done some things that were wrong. And I won't get into the details, but when I fired him, there was a member of human resources who came over to sit in the room while I fired him at this other organization. And I always fire people the same way. I start the conversation with the exact same words. I learned the hard way that them in the eye, and I say, the end result of today's conversation is that we are going to terminate your employment. How much detail you want to get into is up to you. And the message is that decision's been made. This isn't up for debate. We can talk about it if you need to, but it's happening, and it's happening right now. End of discussion. So I call this employee in, and I sit him down, and I get into my little spiel about, hey, today's the day we're letting you go. And this HR representative, who should know better, but again, I think probably a fairly classical female approach. She starts to say, I remember when you used to have an office right down the hall from me, and, a couple of times we went to lunch and blah, 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 and starts and just telling these stories. And I laughed out loud. I shouldn't have, but I did. I couldn't help it. The employee turns to this HR rep and says, you'll have to forgive me if I'm not in the mood for reminiscing right now. I'm being fired. Wow. And I just started laughing, and I was like, you should have known better than that. But it's a perfect example of this research that I came across that said, in general, women tend to be nice and men tend to be kind. And the difference, in some ways, it's almost splitting hairs, right? You think about, well, what's nice? Well, we use manners, and we always use nice words, and we don't say mean things if they cross our mind, and we try not to hurt people's feelings. And, we show up and help because it's a nice thing to do.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas kindness is doing the right thing that needs to be done for a very specific reason.
Mm.
I use the example in the book. I have never, ever handed money to a homeless person.
Yeah.
Ever. I don't. I will offer to take them and buy them lunch. I will offer to get them clothes. I'll offer to connect them with people who can help them find temporary housing.
Yeah.
But I won't hand them money. And I tell them right up front, I'm not going to give you money. And before I got married, I had a couple of girlfriends that were like, you're so mean. That's not nice. I'm like, I don't think it's kind to just keep handing people money when you know where that money is probably going to go.
Yeah.
And instead, kindness is, I can hook you into the right places. I can get you a meal. I can, I got yelled at by a manager at a Jewel Osco once because there was a homeless guy outside in the dead of winter, and I gave him my coat. And he screamed at me because I was encouraging these losers to hang out in front of his store.
Oh.
And I didn't do it. Yeah. Yeah, I didn't do it because I was being nice. I did it because it was kind. I also gave him a piece of paper with a couple of phone numbers and a couple of names and said, call these people on Monday. You need to get out of this weather. You need some resources. You need some help. Because it was kind.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of those things in the book when I was doing research that really kind of struck out at me. And you look at, like, talking about leadership, or you're talking about just your personal life. The difference between men and women, and why men aren't always nice. Like, think about, you raised a daughter, and I'm guessing that you were, I don't know, but probably more likely to be kind to her than to be nice.
This is another thing that I haven't really thought about much. I might be guilty of being nice.
I don't know that it's guilty. I think it's atypical for men.
Yeah.
I give you an example. With one of our kids, our oldest daughter, when she's in her late 20s now, but when she was a teenager, we gave her a cell phone like every other kid her age. Mm-hmm. And as you can imagine, it was a source of nonstop struggle.
Yeah. How old was she?
At the time, I think she was 15 when we gave it to her.
Okay.
And for a couple of years, it was because we had certain rules. You don't need the phone overnight. It needs to be plugged in, charging in our room at 10 o'clock at night.
Yeah.
And every night, where's your phone? It's 10:15. Why isn't your phone plugged in? Put your phone away. We don't have phones out during dinner. We sit down at the table. Those phones can stay in the pocket or stay in your room or stay anywhere but at the table. When guests are over, you need to use your social skills and keep the phone put away. And it was a battle. And it was, she constantly kept saying, you're treating me like a child. You should treat me like an adult. Like, why do you treat me like a child? And it was just this circle of just ugliness and unpleasantness, all resolving around the phone. So finally, one day, I just decided I'd had enough. So I sat her down at the kitchen table and I said, so let's see if we can agree on a couple of things. You want to have your phone all the time. Yes. You think we treat you like a child and you want us to treat you like an adult. Yes. Cool. We're going to do that starting now. And so I pulled out these papers and I slid them across the table, and she said, what is this? And I said, it's a cellular contract. And I said, if you'll read it very carefully, it specifies that you can have your phone 24 hours a day. You still need to follow the same rules that we follow, which is, don't pull it out at the dinner table and things like that. But otherwise, it's yours to do with as you choose. It also says that in return for that, you owe me $40 a month. And you're also responsible for replacement costs if the phone is lost, stolen, or broken. And she looked at me and she read through the contract and she's like, but I don't have a job.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Well, dilemma. I said, again, you want to be treated like an adult. And I said, in the adult world, we have choices to make. We have limited resources, and things like cell phones are privileges. They're not rights. And so we have to decide, am I willing to spend my hard-earned money on this thing that I don't necessarily have to have? So you can decide that, yes, you want to spend your money. She's like, but I don't have a job. And I said, well, you have some money in savings. You can burn through that, or you can, go get a job. So she said she wanted to think about it. And my wife was furious with me. She's furious. She's like, you're setting her up to fail. She doesn't even have a job. How can she possibly succeed at this? And my argument was, I'm setting her up to succeed. I'm teaching her about life.
Yeah.
I'm teaching her about going her own way. I'm teaching her about being responsible, about going and getting a job and making money and the value of things. And long story short, she signed the contract. Oh, I also wrote into the contract that if the payment is late, like even 1 minute, that for every day there is a $5 late fee. And so, of course, the first time she paid it late and was stunned when I actually charged her the late fee. But I said, I just need to refer you to your contract. And long story short, within a couple of months, the arguments had stopped. She had a job. She was doing really well. And it was one of those things where I wasn't being nice. I wasn't the least bit nice about it. I was just very matter of fact. And I was like, well, you have some choices to make. So, let me know what you want to do. Otherwise, give me the phone. But it was kind. And it was kindness with a purpose. And the purpose was teach her a life lesson that I hope has stuck with her.
Yeah. My daughter, I bought her first car and she wrecked it probably, I don't know, first 6 months. I wasn't upset with her. I was glad she was okay. But we never had a conversation about replacing it. I didn't shame her, but I also didn't run out and buy a new car. So she was in high school at the time, took the bus to school and back. She found rides. She did what she had to do. Never asked for another car. In that instance, I thought the best thing to do for her is to let her kind of figure it out. And I think that was a kind way of handling it versus a nice way, which would be, oh, we got to get you a new car right away and we can't have you without a car. But she went for years without a car and never complained, not once. I think she knew that, I wrecked this car and now it's up to me.
That's a good example. And I think there are a lot of parents and probably more moms than dads who would have just run out and said, okay, it wasn't your fault. You got in an accident. Let's get you a new car. That's the nice thing to do. But again, what does the kid learn? Whereas in your case, your daughter learned like, hey, this was on me. They gave me a head start. I messed it up for whatever reason. So get to work.
So kind of going back to this thing about when men meet men, we ask, what do you do? Has that changed over time? Do you think this sizing other men up conversation is changing or has changed?
From my frame of reference, I don't know that I can speak to whether it's really changed much in my lifetime. I've really only been a grown up for 30 years. So.
You count all 30?
All right, like 23 and a half, maybe. I do know, I think if you read through like historical references and, you can even go back and we can theorize about what it was like, back in caveman days. I think when, men ran into other men, we sized them up to see whether or not they were a threat, right? Are you a physical threat to me? And I think over time it's probably changed, whether it's, competing for women and sizing up men as potential competition. And even to some degree, there are societies that still to this day, they meet men and they kind of eyeball them and decide, well, are you good enough for my daughter? Are you good enough to be part of my family? Mm-hmm. I think this conversation that we have, so what do you do? Conversation really is maybe just as much about sizing people up for comparative purposes than it is really trying to put them in a box.
We should go back to the biology piece that we talked about in other episodes. I'm sure it's been happening since even in primates. We know that happens. They just don't use words. They challenge each other. I don't know if you've seen chimps do this, but they tear branches off trees and make a bunch of noise. I am the next king of the pack or whatever.
Right.
But
it's posturing.
Posturing, yeah.
And I think men still do that today. We do it with cars and clothes and jobs and lots of other ways, but it's no different. And, I think we still do it for much the same reason, often, as a way to attract the opposite sex, to attract a mate.
Right.
I told you earlier that there were some things in the book that surprised me. Mm-hmm. That was one of the things. Have you ever heard this myth that men think about sex every 7 seconds?
Yeah, that's a lot.
It's a lot. It's like, I don't know, 8,000 times a day. And what's funny is I probably heard that the first time when I was a kid at some age. I don't remember, but I'm assuming teenager at least. And if you think about, like, if we think about sex 8,000 times a day, there's no time to get anything else done. We couldn't eat, we couldn't do jobs, we couldn't do anything. I kind of joke about it in the book. I don't even think I could get my truck out of the driveway.
Right.
If that was true. If I was thinking about having sex with my wife every 7 seconds, I maybe get out of the driveway, but I wouldn't make it out of the neighborhood without crashing.
I think it would probably drive you crazy every 7 seconds.
I would imagine. So there was some research that I ran into that said the truth, actually, for men in their 20s and early 30s in particular, is that it's probably something more like 8 to 10 times a day.
Yeah, that sounds more reasonable.
Yeah. And of course, yeah, I know, every 7 seconds. And of course, it decreases as we get older, instead of 8 to 10 times a day. Yeah. Instead of 8 to 10 times a day, maybe now once it's every 8 days. I don't know.
Every 8 to 10 days.
I'm a guy. We're pigs. We think about sex all the time, every 7 seconds. There's actually zero research to back that up.
Yeah. I don't know who came up with that. What else kind of surprised you as you wrote this book about the differences between men and women?
There were a lot of things. One really quick tidbit that I thought was quite humorous. The research says that when the average man meets a woman, again, average here, but within 30 seconds, he's pictured her naked. That's how long it takes us.
Wait, I thought we thought about it every 7 seconds.
No. I'm not saying thinking about having sex. We meet a new woman and we immediately picture them naked without their clothes on. Like, try to imagine what they look like.
I think that's the part where I was like, oh, Eric, you're not supposed to tell people that.
Well, especially since we work in a female-dominated profession. That's probably, I don't do it at work. I've never done it at work, I swear. So that was one of the things that I thought was really funny that I came across in my research. But I think one of the things that surprised me and really had me thinking much more than almost everything else I researched was this concept of empathy. Men and women experience empathy very differently. I think if you asked 100 people, 99 of them would tell you that women are much more empathetic than men are. And in some ways, that's true, but it's statistically actually not. And it came down to the research that I found was the different kinds of empathy. Women experience what's called emotional empathy. So they are much more likely than men to be able to tell you how another person probably feels.
Okay.
Right. So given a certain situation, somebody's parent died and maybe they had a really, a tough relationship with that parent. And, my wife could tell you like, oh, she must really have some mixed feelings because, while she certainly, wasn't close to her dad and maybe there's some relief, but she also probably is, just really sad and going to miss him. And I don't think it's even, and she'll just go on and on about all these feelings that this person is having. And I don't know about your partner, but for my wife in particular, she's right about 100% of the time. Yeah. When she reads people's emotional empathy, she gets it right.
Yeah.
Men, on the other hand, are much less likely to experience emotional empathy, and they actually are more likely to have what's called action empathy. Mm-hmm. What that means is that men are way better than women at telling you in a certain situation what somebody is likely to do, as opposed to how they feel. Uh-huh. And you'll hear men say this, you'll hear it come out in their conversation, when a husband and wife can be talking about something that's going on with someone else or what they're going through. And the wife will say, oh, he must feel this way. And you'll hear the husband say something like, I'll bet he thinks he needs to do this or do that.
Oh, interesting.
And that's, I think, one of the things that surprised me is that we are just as likely to experience empathy as women are. It just looks different. It's a different kind.
It's a different kind.
Right.
Huh.
So we can tell you what somebody might do in a situation, and women are more likely to be able to tell us what they might feel.
That's interesting. So it's called action empathy versus emotional empathy.
Correct.
Wow.
And those kinds of things, I think that's why I really enjoyed writing this book. I worked on it for a long time, probably much longer than all the rest of the books that I've written combined, just because there was so much research involved.
Yeah.
And I think I was a little bit stunned in just the amount of research out there about men and how they act and how they think and why.
Yeah.
And I think it's probably just because we're a little bit of a conundrum to the women in our lives. There's a chapter in there about, like, I don't know, do you have this at your house where you can't find something and your partner will go find it immediately?
Oh, yeah. The testosterone gets in your way.
The testosterone. Maybe it's that. I didn't come across that in my research, but so I started researching that question. Well, why is it that men, myself included, we can't find anything? And our wives will go, it's right here.
Yeah.
And they'll go right to it and pick it up. And there are actually brain science reasons for this. There's a couple of factors involved. One is that men tend to search in a grid pattern, right? So we walk into a room and we go grid by grid by grid. We look, is it there? No. Next grid. Is it there? No. And we do that all through the house. So that's part of the way that we look, right, is you get lazy. The more grids you cover, the more likely you are to just skim over it.
Yeah.
But the other reason is it has to do with the part of our brain, and in particular, the part of our memory that we tap into when we're looking for something. So men, we go into our memory and we go try to retrieve the memory of that object the last time we saw it. Mm-hmm. What did it look like and where was it?
Okay.
Right? So if I'm looking, let's say I buy, I don't know, some new Apple AirPods, and the last time I saw them, they were in the box sitting on the kitchen counter. Well, my wife took them out of the box and put them on my dresser. I can go look at my dresser, stare at the AirPods on my dresser, and not see them. Because in my memory, they were in a box and they were in the context of the kitchen. Whereas women tap into the relational part of their brain when they're looking for something. Mm-hmm. Where would this item likely be found? And then they go look there and almost always find it because that's where it belongs. That's where it should be. We're looking for it where it was the last time we saw it.
Last time we saw it.
Yeah. It's one of those brain science things.
Well, who moved it? That's my question.
Yeah, exactly. Why'd you move it? I put it there for a reason. The one difference, by the way, in the research that I found was our garages and tools in particular.
Yeah.
We most men know exactly where their tools belong and they go try to find them exactly where they should be.
Yeah.
And then they're not there. And that's our wives' fault. Whole different conversation. Probably a whole different book.
I've read a few of your books and I also did the audio for them. So this one made me the most uncomfortable.
Why?
There was a lot of things in there, and I don't think you're wrong, but a lot of things that we don't talk about as men, specifically related to women. I was seriously uncomfortable with some of it as I read it, but I also said, you know what, he's right.
Were there any topics in particular that you remember that made you most uncomfortable?
Well, I think the stuff about what men go through when they think about women, the one you mentioned earlier about picturing them naked.
Right.
Yeah, I don't want people to know that.
I don't think any of us do, but
it's out.
It's out.
Yeah.
It's published. It's out there. It's on the podcast. Secret's out. Sorry.
I'm guessing most women go, duh. No kidding.
Yeah.
We already knew that.
Yeah. I think probably I wasn't surprised that men picture women naked. I frankly, I don't know if women do. Like, do they picture men naked at some point? Probably not 30 seconds in, but
I don't know. And if they do, they certainly wouldn't tell anyone.
No, and they wouldn't write a book about it either. So who's the idiot? But I think I was surprised just by how fast on average. Like, it's
30
not
seconds.
Right, 30 seconds. I mean, come on. Like, are we really that bad? Apparently we are.
Yeah.
But I wasn't surprised that most men, when they meet women, they try to imagine what they look like without their clothes on, or even in a swimming suit or whatever the case may be. but 30 seconds? I mean, that's all we give them? Like, hey, you're a professional, you're an equal, you're somebody who's to be valued for your knowledge and your expertise, and I'm picturing you naked. Like, it goes that fast, literally. It's disgusting.
Have any of your employees read the book?
Gosh, I hope not. I hope not. Especially not the female ones. Then I'd be in trouble.
I know. You'd be like, nobody coming to your office anymore. Where'd everybody go? You want to talk about the other books you've written?
I wrote a novel. I did my one attempt at writing a novel called Not My Thing. It's about shockingly a couple that's on the verge of divorce, and they go to see this therapist who weirdly is like 6'4" and like 250 pounds and never tucks his shirts in.
Weird.
And is a little bit sarcastic. I know it's weird. But what do they say? Write what you know, right?
Yeah.
So it's funny because that far and away has been the bestseller out of the books that I've written. And also I wrote a book called Thus Saith the Ward. Mm-hmm. So obviously a play on words, instead of Thus Saith the Lord. That I wrote a couple of years after my dad passed away. I think like a lot of men, he and I had, we'll call it an interesting relationship. A lot of conflict when I was younger, and some distance as I got older. And one of the things I realized about him at some point in my life was that, he didn't really get much of a head start. His biological dad took off when he was a toddler. His mom married an alcoholic. And he didn't really have an example. And so when he became a dad, he was just kind of flying by the seat of his pants.
Sure.
And I talk about at the end of the book, given all of that, he actually was a good man who did the best that he could. Mm-hmm. But the book is every chapter is a story about a life lesson that I learned from him. Some of them he intentionally taught me. Some of them he taught me quite by accident. Kind of like when you have a boss and you're like, I'll never do that if I'm a boss. Yeah, some of the life lessons were along those lines. But,
sure.
It was a really enjoyable book, and it was very cathartic for me, I think, just to kind of put it all down on paper. Like, this is who that man was. It's funny because the first story is from when I was in kindergarten, and the last story is about a can of Spam, and it was after he had already died. So just a fun, enjoyable, and insightful book to write. So other than that, I've got some workbooks out there. I've got some journals. Like there's a gratitude journal that I wrote and published. I'm a big proponent of gratitude, being thankful. I think it has a way of resetting us every day and getting rid of the negativity from the day before. And so I do myself, and I always encourage other people to get up every day, and before you even start your day, find one thing to be thankful for. So yeah, lots of writing. I've enjoyed it. I actually have a degree in journalism. It was my career before I started my real career, and I never even started working as a journalist. I decided I wasn't cynical enough to be a journalist, but I was cynical enough to be a therapist. So.
When did you discover you could write?
High school. Had a teacher. It was in an advanced English course. Mrs. Marichko. She's still talk to her to this day. She's a remarkable woman. But she made me write, and she made me write better. And she said, I know you, and I know you can do better, and I'm not going to accept this. And she would give me my papers back and tell me to redo them and redo them again. And she made me dig deep and find out that not only was I pretty good at writing, but I loved it. Just love the expression. It's funny because I'm such a guy, right? All about like drive a truck and rah, rah, rah. But I'll tell you, when I'm going through tough periods in life, the one thing that I do almost every time is write poetry. Wow. Just has a way of helping me get things right in my head. I actually, when my wife and I were getting married, we had picked out a poetry reading for our wedding ceremony, and I didn't tell my wife this, but I had written a poem, and I secretly replaced it. So the first time she heard it, Yeah, it was something. But the first time she heard it was actually when we were standing up at the altar in the middle of our wedding ceremony. She just kind of turned and looked at me like, "What are you doing?
What in the world?"
Yeah. But it was.
She didn't know like you wrote it until later.
No.
That's
I mean,
crazy.
it was obvious when it was read. The person that we had read it,
the content.
Yeah, but it's just something that I've just found that I love to do, and it's a creative outlet. I'm, unlike you, I'm not a musical person. I rarely even listen to music, believe it or not. But for me, reading and writing,
I have this memory of you playing the piano.
I can sort of play the piano. So let me just explain why. I was in junior college, and I was in my last semester of junior college, and I needed one class, some sort of like, just blow off class to get the credits. So in my mind, taking an intro to piano class seemed like a blow off.
Not so much. Didn't
know how to read music. Never played an instrument in my life. Found out I can't read music. Never will be able to read music. Had to learn everything by memory. It was the hardest class I've ever taken through all my years of college. And for our final, we had to write and play our own piece of music in front of the professor and the entire class. That was the final for this intro to piano class.
Oh my God.
It's the worst thing ever. Yeah, it was horrible. So I played the piece, and the whole class was silent. And they're all just kind of sitting there looking at me, and the professor's staring at me, and he goes, "That was dark." I'm like, "Oh, okay."
That's a compliment.
Sorry, I don't. So writing, we'll stick with writing. It's less dark.
Yeah. So I read Not My Thing. And what I took away from that was just all the practical stuff in there. And I really like kind of the back and forth between the therapist and the clients in the story. I think it captures real counseling sessions very well. And there's just a lot of practical information in it.
Yes.
That book was really good.
Thanks. That was intentional. When I work with couples, I usually see them somewhere between probably 10 and 12 times. I tell couples at the beginning, like, 10 sessions in, if we're not done or almost done, you probably need to fire me.
Yeah.
This isn't working. I'm not one of those people that keeps people coming back for 6, 12 months, 2 years, whatever. I think that's not therapy anymore. That's a crutch.
Yeah. That's coaching.
That's coaching, and really bad coaching, probably. But I in the book, there obviously isn't room in a novel to put the content of every single therapy session, but I tried to give a pretty good picture of what it looks like, what the process looks like without being too boring. And there's a lot of me in the therapist. I use this example of using eyeglasses as a prop, and I do that all the time. I call it the dumb therapist routine, and it works with teenagers. Teenagers want to believe that everybody's stupid, right? And especially adults.
Yeah.
And so when teenagers sit in my office and say stupid things, I'll kind of give them this confused look, and I'll take my glasses off and I'll chew on the earpiece and I'll just pretend to be confused. Like, I don't get it. Can you explain it to me? And the more they try to explain this sort of ridiculous thing that they're saying, the more they realize it sounds stupid. And so it's a prop that I use to not have to confront them directly and not be just like their parents and challenging them head to head, instead letting them figure it out on their own.
Yeah.
And so there's stuff like that in the book. The therapist uses that and some other things that I do. So it was fun to write, to poke fun at myself more than anything else. The therapist is a bit of a goofball, and I probably am too in session.
Some of the back and forth between the male client and the therapist in that book is pretty funny.
Yeah, and it's probably pretty close to word for word conversations I've had in my office. Men tend to come in one of two ways in therapy. They're either just completely checked out and disinterested, and they'll just sit there and stare at you and say a bunch of things like, "I don't know, I don't know. I have no idea."
They're shocked.
I don't know. What do you think? Right? Or they come in ready to go to war, and wanting to prove to you that you don't know what you're talking about, and prove to their partner that they're wrong. There's not a whole lot of in between. until you get them really engaged.
Do you find that the men that come in with their wives are sort of there as a last-ditch effort to save it?
I think that's true for the men and the women. I tell people all the time that, the therapist's office is often the place that couples stop on their way to the divorce attorney's office. They can say like, oh, we tried,
right.
We tried therapy, it didn't work. As opposed to being genuinely committed to the process of making change. There are some couples that come in ready to work. The problem is it's often one of them who's ready to work. That scene in the book where the therapist kicks the wife out of the session and sits down with the husband and looks at him and says, so who is she?
Yeah.
Is an exact replication of a conversation I had with a client.
Wow.
I knew it. I knew from the first couple of sessions, I knew that this guy had something going on the side. And
wow.
I was kind of like, okay, hey, go out and wait in the waiting room for a minute. I'll be with you in a minute, and sat down in front of him who's who. It was the same conversation, but it was a very effective technique. Just look, man, stop wasting my time, stop wasting your time, your wife's time, everybody else. If you want to go do that, that's cool. Just be honest and transparent about it.
I had action empathy for that guy.
Did you?
Run.
I know what he's thinking about doing. Yeah, it was a fun book to write. I don't know that fiction is really my thing. It's been well received. It's reviews on it
it's funny, serious, it's touching, it's practical. There's some really good practical stuff in there.
Yeah, and I tried to get across, I think, just when couples are dealing with the kinds of issues that couple is. Just the pain. I think people are hurting on both sides.
Yeah.
Even when there's one person who did something wrong and one person who was victimized, the reality is that in a relationship, both sides did something wrong.
Yeah.
Both sides didn't do something right.
Right.
And so I think that was the message, was there's enough pain to be spread around on both sides here. And part of the process is getting rid of that. And it was easy for me to write because I've sat through it, a couple hundred times in my office.
Yeah. So where can people get your books?
Amazon. I think if you just go look up my name, that'll probably take you to them. You can also find them. We have a website. It's called psychward.com, psychward.com. So lots of information on there. Books. There's a lot of free resources. There's also ways if you want to get some access to either personal life coaches or even clinicians, all that's there as well. But I put the books on there. It really just links you to Amazon, so they're on the website, but it's going to take you right there.
Nice. All right. Well, this was fun.
Yeah, it's a little weird being interviewed.
Yeah, it's a little weird interviewing you.
I like being on the other side of it. It's more fun to ask the questions. So, Mike, a couple weeks, we have a guest again. Going to be a little bit different this time. Up to this point, we've just been interviewing male guests.
Our first female.
It will be our first female, and I think we're just going to jump right in. Might as well go full bore if we're going to have a female guest. We are going to be interviewing a sex worker. Somebody who is active as an escort. And we're not going to be talking to her necessarily about the graphic details of what she does. Instead, we want to talk to her about the men who come to see her. So for everybody listening to this, I encourage you to tune into the next episode. I know I'm really looking forward to it. A little curious about how the conversation's going to go, but I actually am really excited to have this conversation. I think it's something that people don't really talk about, and I think it's worth having a conversation about.
Absolutely. Going to be interesting. Definitely.
Yes, sir.
Well, until next time.
Yep, I appreciate it. Thank you much.
Yeah, thank you. See ya.